Well, the holidays, of course, can be a stressful time for many, especially if you're hosting a holiday gathering. But what if we told you there were ways of minimizing your stress while hosting responsibly and staying safe this holiday season?
Rohan Hatay is a litigation lawyer, and he's here to speak today to us about social host liability and how to organize a safe gathering this season. Rohan, good morning. Thanks so much for coming in.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah, so I don't think a lot of people know this term, social host liability. Obviously, we're hosting people over the holidays and we want them to have a good time. Generally, there's common sense. You know, if you're drinking, we're not going to let someone drive home if they've had too many drinks. But kind of break it down for us. When does that duty of care come on to the host when it comes to things like people underage, drinking, even food allergies?
That's a great question. And, you know, social host liability certainly exists in Ontario. The general host or guest relationship, you need something a little bit more for a legal duty to exist. But social host liability is very well and present here in Ontario. And generally speaking, you want to make sure that if you're hosting a party and someone's drinking or there's excessive drinking that's happening, you have to use a common sense approach. So if you notice that someone's drinking too much, you want to take steps to try to avoid them from getting behind the wheel and driving. And there's certain steps that I would recommend that people take whenever they're hosting a party, because liability exists.
Such as, what would some of those steps be, Rohan?
Well, the first step that I would suggest is making sure that there's ways for people to get home safe. So if you have ride-sharing programs, taxis, make sure that you have those phone numbers available. Even for some of your parties, you can have Uber, where there's discount codes for your parties. You could do that. You want to monitor sometimes people's drinking if you're a social host. And it's not that every guest that comes into your house or to your party, you have to do a breathalyzer when they leave. But you do want to use a common sense approach and make sure that if somebody is drinking excessively, you notice that, you put a stop to it. You put a cutoff date or a cutoff time, and you want to try to take some of those steps.
And let's say, for example, you're the host, but you're doing it at a venue that isn't your home. Where does the liability lie there? Is it with, let's say, the catering company or the bartenders you hired, or is it still your responsibility as that host?
It would still be your responsibility as the host. If it's in a commercial venue and it's a commercial purpose, the way the courts look at things, generally speaking, for social host liability in Ontario is really two factors. There's a foreseeability factor. So if the harm is reasonably foreseeable, there could attract liability. And then proximity as well, in terms of they look at your relationship from the host to the guest. So if there is, for example, a party that's being held in your home versus a commercial setting, and the proximity to the guest, is there a paternalistic relationship or not, or some sort of special relationship that exists, the courts will look at that to determine whether or not liability would exist.
Rohan, what if the case, you described something there where, if someone maybe has had too much to drink and wants to leave and sort of appears to have like car keys in their hand, wants to leave, but you try to tell them, no, you shouldn't go, you shouldn't be driving, but they do anyway. Are you still on the hook?
You have to take steps that are reasonable, right? You can't force someone to do anything, but if you take steps that are reasonable, for example, if you see that someone is in that exact same circumstance, and you take steps to say, don't drive, call a taxi, provide overnight accommodations, for example, and someone still goes out and drive, then it's your responsibility. If you feel that you need to make any certain phone calls, you could do that as well. But there is always the risk that you could be liable. But for social host liability in Ontario, it's very fact specific. So the way that the courts look at it is determinative of the facts, and they're going to look at, was it reasonably foreseeable, the harm, and what steps did you take as the host to make sure that the people are reasonably safe in your property when they leave?
Yeah, so, let's say you are hosting something on your property as a homeowner. You do have that responsibility for what happens on your property, correct?
For sure. And even if you're having someone in your property and, in today's day and age with the winter conditions, you want to make sure that your property is safe as well. If you're clearing snow, clearing ice, salting, etc., those are all things that you should take steps as a homeowner where people are coming to sort of reduce or limit your liability.
I also understand, Rohan, that there's an element to what you actually serve at your party that can sort of, not bulletproof you, but sort of show that you're trying to be a responsible social host, as it were.
Well, I think that's part of it as well. So if you're serving alcohol, you might want to take steps as well to serve non-alcoholic beverages, make sure that you have food that's available. And again, I would designate a certain cutoff time for serving alcohol. At some certain time, you stop serving to allow people to be able to reasonably get home.
And it's not the holidays without food, lots of food. In situations where there are food allergies, and let's say they've told you they have an allergy, but perhaps the catering company or other people bringing a potluck weren't aware of it, where does that fall? Does it get messy with food allergies in situations like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that if you're hosting a party, and we're having an office Christmas party as well, we made sure to tell our caterers that make sure that things are allergy free, and I think that is on the host to make sure. But there's also some responsibility on the guest in terms of food allergies to ask those questions. Even for guests when they come to these parties, if you're drinking, you want to take steps as well to not have to get behind the wheel and drive. So it works both ways in terms of liability.
Lots to consider here. Okay, Rohan Hatay, appreciate you joining us this morning. Thanks for all this important information.
Thank you very much for having me.
Have a good holiday season. Stay safe.
You too.
Happy holidays.
I think we all
Thanks so
can
much,
too.
Rohan.
Okay.